you're in the business of helping companies to be successful from an advocacy perspective. And you are very active in the DC arena. So what is the election results? What do those things look like from your perspective for the insurance industry?
Well, good place to start, and there's a lot of different ways to answer that question. I mean, let's start at the obvious, just as a foundation. I mean, we have a new administration, a change in parties to a Democratic White House, a new President Biden. And at the same time, we have both houses of Congress switching over to the Democratic Party. So this we all know. But so there's certain assumptions, that kind of baseline fundamental assumptions that we start from, that there's going to be an increased appetite for regulation generally, more emphasis on the federal role, traditionally. A little bit more of an appetite to take a more active role in insurance on the Democratic side of the aisle than you would necessarily see on the Republican side. That's not always true, and it's dangerous to generalize. But as a baseline proposition, potential for legislation coming out of Congress, but we also see and have already seen the ability of Congress to push the executive branch.
There's two items I think that I've been thinking about recently. One is bud tender liability, or more specifically, professional liability versus general liability. Your typical general liability policy provides coverage for all company operations, including the non-professional negligent acts of company employees. But there's no coverage for the rendering of or failure to render professional service. And there are, decades of litigation concerning the scope of what is considered a professional service. While it generally doesn't mean product instructions or warnings, there is at least some argument that it includes specific recommendations or related to the treatment of a medical condition. So I think the question remains, where is that line between being a store clerk and being a canna pharmacist? I'm aware of at least one case not a case, but an issue in Colorado from 2018 where there was some concern over bud tenders making recommendations to consumers regarding the applications of cannabis to treat pregnancy-related morning sickness, and you can just see how that would snowball into all kinds of liability issues.
Brian, what do you think are some of the likely avenues that the regulatory environment will use to monitor compliance with the new AI compliance?
Good and very important question, Robin. I mean, probably initially there will be examinations after the fact, looking at conduct after the fact, as we do now and have for many, many years. That presupposes that the regulators know what they're looking for and understand a little bit what's under the hood, so to speak. Generally, I think translating the regulation of AI, if I can call it that, into real, practical, usable laws and regulatory practices is a tall order, as you mentioned. I think we'll get there. It may take a few years. Another method of monitoring would be some sort of self-compliance. That's what I would expect it to start out as, until the regulators have a better command of understanding what they're looking for and not looking for, any violations of the principles that you articulated. By the way, if you go through all those principles, I think legal and compliance is mentioned in every one of the 5. So clearly a big focus from a regulatory perspective.
Discrimination, exclusion, whether intentional or not, isn't something that we as a society can afford to have. We can't continue to ignore it. It is out there. We need to move beyond those issues that are obvious signs of discrimination and exclusion to those that are less obvious.
I absolutely agree with the director. And in a broader sense, if you look even beyond insurance, diversity is simply a fact of life. And it is a welcome fact of life, so far as I'm concerned. It would be a pretty boring place if we all had to wear the same color shirts and the same color ties because we only had one color. It's what keeps life interesting. We also know from numerous studies, Boston Consulting, my old firm, Deloitte, Harvard Business Review, diversity in a company leads to better results. So it's not just a a fact. It is also morally good. I think that's something most of us can agree on. And it is financially good, economically good. We're at the point now, and I think we are fortunate to be at a point where we can look and we can say, what do we need to do to make organizations more diverse? Why should organizations be more diverse?